Hey there everybody, Professor Cloud here with a new build guide video for Diablo 4. The Paladin is the latest class to be made available by Blizzard, and although I was not necessarily a big fan of the class in previous Diablo entries, I have really found a build that I love in Diablo 4. So I thought that I would give you all the keys to this build and discuss why I'm enjoying it so much. Now first let me start by saying that this is not a one-button build, because I really find those builds boring. I want to actually have to fight my way through nightmare dungeons and actually think about how I'm going to take care of mobs and bosses and infernal hordes of the pit. This build is also a very skill-based build, as I'm pretty sure most Paladin builds are, that focus on 2 skills for area traversal, but use a combination of 4 skills to take bosses down within about 30 seconds. World bosses excluded from that. I call this build the Hammer and Shield Throwing Arbiter. Rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? It uses the Holy Bolt skill in combination with Blessed Shield to quickly deal with any common or elite mobs. If you do run up on any rares or 2, then throw down Consecration to both heal and increase damage while using the same Holy Bolt and Blessed Shield combination. Should allow you to cut through all of those enemies just like butter. Now once you get to a boss room, you will use a similar combo to what you do with elites, but instead you'll add in 2 more skills to really focus on that boss to prevent any adds that might want to spawn. You'll start with Consecration, just like you do with rares, and then call down the Spear of the Heavens to pin the boss within the Consecration circle, while also inflicting judgment on that boss. Lastly, you'll become an Arbiter by using the Arbiter of Justice skill, and along with all of the aspects and passives that you key in off of your gear or your skill tree, you should just be able to melt almost any boss in any dungeon. This build is a lot of fun, especially for those that get bored by the one-button or easy-button builds that are out there. So let's dive into the specifics of the build so that you can understand how to put it together yourself. I have also included a link to the build that I have in Maxroll within the description below. Now keep in mind, this build is not maxed. It doesn't have every Paragon board. It has 4 Paragon boards if you include the starter. I will talk about those in this build as well. I am not going to go through a step-by-step of, hey, level 1 choose this, level 2 choose that, because I think that should be up to each individual player. I do highly recommend, obviously, speccing into your skills as quickly as possible and then adding in the passives, but those I think you should add in based on how you're feeling the build is playing at a point in time. You're gonna want to be able to adjust on the fly as you level up and as you increase the level of difficulty. The current character that you're seeing on the screen right now is currently at level 118 on the Paragon board, so it's at max skill level and is about halfway through the available Paragon skills that most people put their points into. So I don't have all 6 board or all 7 boards attached, but I do have the most important ones, and we'll talk about that. And I'm currently playing at Torment 2 level difficulty. So let's go ahead and start off by taking a look at the attributes for this character. Okay, let's start by talking about the basic attributes that you will need to focus on as you level up and choose the gear pieces that you're going to put on your character. You're going to absolutely want to focus primarily into strength, as that will help increase your overall skill damage, and this is a must until you hit the level cap. It also has an added benefit of increasing your armor as well, but not necessarily by a large amount, considering how much armor is required to reduce incoming damage by the maximum amount that Diablo allows. Now once you do hit the level cap, I recommend adding some focus into willpower, as that will help keep you using your skills, as it will increase your faith recovery or your resource recovery, which is the resource that you will consume to use your skills. So the more recovery you get, the more you're going to be able to use your skill more often. In addition, as you start filling out Paragon boards, you will become less reliant on strength alone to specify how much damage you're going to do, because you're going to be able to choose specific damage multipliers or damage passives that are going to come out of the Paragon board, such as overall damage increases or damage increases to specific skills, or things like, for example, I mentioned inflicting judgment in Spear of Heaven. You're also going to be inflicting judgment via the Holy Bolt. If you add extra damage to being judged, that's going to allow you to just completely one-shot very common enemies in most cases. But we'll talk about some of the first few Paragon boards later in the video, as well as some other attributes and modifiers that we're going to put on our gear to help increase damage. Next thing I want to talk about are your gems. When it comes to the gems, they're going to be tightly tied to the attributes that we talked about earlier, which is why I'm focusing on them before I even start talking about the gear. So with respect to your armor, you're going to choose rubies and sapphires, as they will increase your strength and willpower. Do remember that this is a sword and shield based paladin, so you will have an extra armor slot with your shield if you should choose to use it. As you can see here, I've got an even slot set for both rubies and sapphires, and then my extra one is with ruby to, again, give me that extra damage. But at this particular point in the build, as I talked about, we don't need to focus as much on strength to generate our damage, so I could very quickly swap it out to a sapphire if I wanted to. Now, when it comes to your one-handed weapon, in this case a sword that I'm using, you're going to have a couple of options depending which one you want to focus on. Neither one of them is right or wrong, as they will both help you generate more damage when you use your skill combos. The first is the emerald that you're going to see here, and the emerald will increase your critical hit damage, but that will only work well if you make sure to increase critical hit chance, as well as when you choose your gear effects. The other option is to go with a sapphire, which will increase your damage to vulnerable enemies. Now, you are making enemies vulnerable through your Holy Bolt skill because of the Divine Bolt option that we're going to choose, and we'll talk about skills in a little bit. So that is an option and does work very well, especially with the mobbing skill combo that we will be using. Because you're going to be starting with Holy Bolt on every attack. It allows you to inflict both Judgment and Vulnerable immediately, and therefore the increase to vulnerable enemies works out very, very nicely. And that is something that you can find in the Paragon boards as well. Now lastly, when it comes to jewelry, and I think this is pretty well true for any build, this will pretty much be the same as with it. Lastly, when it comes to jewelry, this is going to be pretty much the same as with any build. You're going to use the gems that make the most sense based on your resistance levels for a particular element. Whatever element has the lowest resistance level, choose that gem for one or more of your jewelry sockets. Now, if we look here at mine, my lowest one is cold currently. I am filling it with a sapphire to get 900 cold resistance. I'm then getting the same thing, though, for fire, and I'm getting the same thing for lightning. You've only got 3 slots available, so take advantage of whatever makes the most sense for you. So with that, let's now talk about the gear that these sockets are actually going to go into. Now, when it comes to your gear, there are a number of things for you to consider. The first will be what basic modifiers you will want to have to help provide some offensive and defensive increases where you need them. But none of them are going to be a huge increase until you get to the Ancestrals and Mythics, of course. With that in mind, I focused on the following. Every single piece of gear that I have usually have a strength increase, a maximum life increase, some type of resistance, and base or vulnerable damage increases. So if we look here at this armor, or this chest piece, it's got the strength, it's got the max life. I then went in, because it came with increase to armor, I went with that instead of resistance. And then I included a 560 life per second as a defensive option as well, instead of a base or vulnerable damage. I then put in a additional item because it's sanctified, to get a increase to my consecration skill, which we're going to be talking about when we go through the skill tree. Now, outside of those, any modifiers that are specific to the Paladin skills that we will be equipping are also important. Again, that 70.2% consecration duration is huge. It basically allows you to keep a consecration up constantly, because with that 70.2%, I can actually keep a consecration circle up. And by the time that my cooldown has finished, I actually still have 2 more seconds before I need to trigger it again. I love this particular modifier. Now, chance for Judgment to do double damage is also a nice one, as Judgment will be applied with every Holy Bolt throw, which will be a big part of the mobbing combination. Judgment is also applied by the Spear of Heavens that we use during boss fights. Now, one point that I do want to make here is that Maximum Life and any other health-based modifiers are a personal choice for me. I like to have a more balanced build where I can both tank as well as throw out some serious damage. In addition, with all the different damage types that Diablo has, having a little extra life when one of them does inevitably break through is always good. I love doing hardcore runs, and this is a must-have over a marathon build or a marathon run like that. You need to be a little bit more balanced in your build designation. Now, last thing to think about with respect to your gear, once you get around level 15 or so, is the aspects you want to collect and apply to your gear. For this build, I chose to rely or really lean into the Paladin class-based aspects. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the Paladin class-based aspects, you cannot go and farm these from dungeons like you can all of the other class-based aspects, because the area where those dungeons are going to exist is in the new expansion that, as of this recording, is not available yet. So, thankfully, they drop very, very judiciously from the beginning of the game on. I didn't have any problem finding Paladin-based aspects. Now, there's a lot of them, so you're not going to get them all at once, but you're going to very quickly find some that you really like. So the list as follows from top to bottom, left to right. We start with the Firm Decree, which increases your armor based on judging. So judging an enemy, which, remember, Holy Bolt is going to do, Spear of Heavens is going to do, is going to, in this case, grant you 78% increased armor for 5 seconds. So I'm going to be consistently increasing my armor for 5 seconds at a time because I'm constantly throwing out Holy Bolt. The next one is Hail's Salve. With Hail's Salve, I'm healing while at full life, which fortifies you for 0.8% of maximum life and grants 50% increased armor for 5 seconds. So there's another increase of armor for 5 seconds that you're constantly triggering, as long as you're fortifying. Fortify comes into play later when we start looking at our skill tree, because fortifying will trigger other, if you are fortified, it will trigger other effects. Next is Vehement Brawler, which is going to allow us to cast an ultimate skill, which is the Arbiter, and increase your damage by, in this case, 24% for 8 seconds, and gain 2 additional ultimate skill ranks. Now, the ultimate skill ranks aren't terribly important. Matter of fact, the skill ranks themselves for Paladin are not important. That's why I was really adamant about putting points into strength at the beginning and then going in for damage modifiers when we start looking at the Paragon board and the modifiers on our gear. Next is going to be Assimilation. Assimilation is going to gain an increase to our dodge chance, and when you dodge, Fortify for 2.75% of your max life. Again, it's all about keeping the Fortify full. If we keep the Fortify full, that is going to give us a lot of great capability. In fact, there is a legendary socket in one of the Paragon boards that increases damage based off of Fortify, or based off of armor, one of the two. And it's a huge increase by hundreds of a percent. Next, we look at the Boots of Unstoppable Force. This is going to give us movement speed, and then double the bonus if we are unstoppable. And when we go into Arbiter form, we are in fact unstoppable. Then on our sword, we actually go with, there's actually 2 different options here. There is either proselytizing, which you'll notice I don't have on the sword currently, but when I originally wrote this script, I did, and it's because I keep going back and forth. The Paladin skills for offensive are not nearly as good as the ones for defensive. For whatever reason, I don't really know. And there's none that are exceptional. So depending upon which skills you really enjoy of this skill set that we're looking at, you may want to switch back and forth between different ones. So with proselytizing, you're chaining judicator skills, and in this particular case, the Black Rail, while healthy, your skills deal an increase in damage. Double the bonus against weakened enemies, and every once in a while, enemies will get weakened. It's not something you're triggering a lot. So both of these are, in fact, valuable, and there are others that are of value as well, but none of them are real big standouts. So I would say in this particular case, this one's an optional, and choose whatever you feel works best for you. Now, when we start to take a look at our jewelry, we move over to... All right, this is actually not the correct one because I screwed up and sanctified this before I could change the aspect, so I do apologize for this one. But the one that I actually use here is Ascension. And Ascension, whenever we are in Arbiter form, in other words, we're triggering our ultimate skill, it increases our damage dealt out. And that's already huge because Arbiter already does a crap ton of damage to begin with. You then tie that in with Tyrael's Jurisdiction, which the Arbiter Wing Strikes, which are basically lightning strikes once you've turned into an Arbiter, now seek nearby enemies and deal 192% increased damage based on this particular quality level of the gear piece and the power level of the gear piece. Needless to say, we bumped this up to 800 because of Ancestral. It's going to be even higher. You get the idea. We then tie that in with Voracious Rage, which helps us with resource cost. So killing an enemy with a core skill, which by the way, your Blessed Shield is a core skill, is going to refund 15% of its base cost. And this can only happen once per skill cast. Then the last thing is our shield. And this one is a change that I just recently made. I was running a unique in this particular slot, but I finally found a Ancestral 800 that I really liked, and in that case, I decided to put on a better aspect than what was on the unique. So in this particular case, we're running Holy Punishment as our aspect, and that increases our holy and fire damage, in this case by 65%. Of course, the aspect percentages are always going to be based on the level of aspect that you have, which is always based on how you've learned the different aspects, how many you've trashed or scrapped, things along those lines. That will increase the level of aspect. Holy damage is inflicted by almost all of our skills, but primarily by the Holy Bolt, of course, as well as by the Blessed Spears. I think it's the Blessed Spears. For whatever reason, Arbiter does not actually inflict Holy Bolt, or Holy damage. But we'll look at that when we look at the skill tree. Now, the most important ones of these are the ones that increase skill and Arbiter damage, movement speed, and increase Fortify. The others are not nearly as important and could be swapped out for others that may be more valuable. For example, Proselytizing could absolutely be swapped, as could Voracious Rage, but Ascension and Tyrael's Jurisdiction that I talked about in nice combination are hugely important against elite mobs, rare mobs, and world bosses. So let's now take this information and plug it into what our skills are so that you're going to get a better understanding of how all of the pieces play together. Before we start talking about the skills, like every class, there is a special category that you're able to choose as part of the Paladin class. Rogues have something similar. Every class has something that they're able to spec into, usually around level 15 or so. In the Paladin's case, it is called an Oath. And for this particular build, I chose the Judicator Oath. Now, that being said, I do want to call out that you could also choose the Disciple Oath as well, because the Disciple Oath increases the amount of time that you stay in Arbiter form. It also increases damage that you deliver via Disciple skills while in Arbiter form. But I chose the Judicator one because I'm constantly inflicting Judgment. So your basic skills now apply Judgment, which by the way they already were, Judgment can now be detonated early by your core Judicator skills, which is my Blessed Shield, dealing 103% weapon damage in a small area and gaining your Judicator skill benefits. So basically what this is doing is I inflict Judgment with one throw of the Holy Bolt. I then throw out the shield, which we'll talk about in a little bit, does deflect, has different deflect capabilities. Not deflect, but it bounces from enemy to enemy. And each one of those enemies that it hits that has Judgment applied to it, it will cause them to explode. Well, if there are enough enemies in a nice tight circle, that explosion kills the non-judged enemies, and now all of a sudden you've got everybody on the field completely dead. It's a beautiful sight to see, let me tell you, especially when you're doing dungeons, because everyone is in a nice tight space. When you're out on the field, say in Helltide, it's not quite as pretty, but in Helltide, they do tend to come in nicely tight packs. Now, when it comes to our skill tree, let's start at the very top. So, like any build, there are going to be 6 active skills that you will be speccing into, and then many passives that will help round out the overall build. Now, what was very interesting for me about this build is that I did not level up any of the skills beyond level 1, other than what may come from gear modifiers. The reason for that is that there is just not enough of a bump from level to level of damage or attribute increases. And by not putting points into your skill ranks, it allows you to then spec into more passives that will help you out. So in this particular Holy Bolt, we are looking at the Divine Bolt option, and Divine Bolt option gives us applying of Judgment, which we were getting anyway because of our oath, and then it becomes a Disciple skill as well, and then it also pierces, meaning it goes through enemies in a nice straight line, dealing damage and applying Vulnerable. Remember, I talked about Vulnerable being an option for your Sword Gem because you are in fact inflicting Vulnerable via your Holy Bolt. Obviously, that means you're going to want to use your Holy Bolt on your boss fights as well so that you can get those damage increases too. Now, let's take a look at all of the skill combinations, and we're going to do this via skill combination that you're going to use, or at least that I use during my gameplay. So, for most standard mobbing that you could see in, say, Helltides, the Undercity, or when you're doing any kind of dungeon, you're just going to switch back and forth between Holy Bolt, specifically Holy Bolt, Divine Bolt, and Blessed Shield, Shield of Justice. Now, Blessed Shield, Shield of Justice is a ability to hurl your shield. So you're throwing a hammer, you're hurling a shield. This is with Holy Energy, dealing, in this case, 20,000 damage that ricochets up to 3 times. Now, with the Shield of Justice, we're dealing a 1% additional damage for each armor on your shield. So the more armor you have on your shield, the better. Meaning, as you go up in power, your shield armor will, of course, go up. And then the Blessed Shield detonates Judgment, as I talked about, and ricochets an additional 5 times. So now we're talking about 8 ricochets. It's absolutely incredible. And then whenever Blessed Shield detonates Judgment, it empowers your next throw to deal 40% increased damage. So when we talked about keeping your faith up and constantly resource building your faith, that allows for your multiple throws of the Blessed Shield. Absolutely fantastic mobbing capabilities. And those are the only 2 skills that you need to worry about when it comes to mobbing. Now, when you get to some of the tougher mobs, say ones that have, I typically see 1 or 2, sometimes as many as 3 rares in a mob. That's then when you're going to throw down Consecration. You'll throw down Consecration first, and then you'll start with the Holy Bolt Blessed Shield combo. And with Consecration, we're specifically running the Hallowed Ground version of Consecration. You're going to bathe in the light for 10 seconds, healing you and your allies for maximum life per second, and damaging enemies that are in the circle. So most common enemy mobs will just die to the Consecration circle, allowing you to focus on elites and rares. And then while inside Consecration, you and your allies deal an additional 15% additional damage. So you're getting a damage buff for yourself. and you're going to consume 15% less resource, allowing you to throw that shield more times. Then the consecration size is increased and lasts an additional 4 seconds with the hallowed ground version. And then enemies within consecration are now weakened. So if you'll remember, there was a specific aspect that I had that triggered off of weakened enemies. So now I'm triggering that, I'm triggering vulnerable, I'm triggering judgment. I am just throwing damage around like it's candy. It's fantastic. Now, in addition to this, we go back to the modifier, the special modifier that I put onto one of my gear pieces. I think it was my chest piece. I'm increasing the duration of consecration. So by default, it's 10 seconds. With hallowed ground, it's 4 more, so we're at 14. I increased it by 70%, so we're upwards of around 21 for how long it lasts. And look at how long the cooldown is on this particular skill. It's 13. So I can just keep running consecrations, one right after another. It's a beautiful thing. And you can stack. I believe they do stack, because I have overlapped them during certain world boss fights. Okay, so let's talk about the combination of skills that you're going to use for a boss fight. And in this case, you're going to use pretty much all of them. And I'm going to use the skill bar as an easier way to go through this. So the first thing that you're always going to do in any boss fight is you're going to drop down the consecration circle. That's going to help keep you healing, keeping your fortify up. It's going to increase your damage buff. The next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use Spear of the Heavens. And in this case, we are using the Pronouncement of Heaven version of Spear of the Heavens. So this is going to rain down 4 spears from the sky, dealing a huge amount of damage and knocking down any enemies. Now, obviously, it doesn't knock down bosses. And it's going to do it for 1.5 seconds. After 1.5 seconds, the spears burst, dealing additional damage. Now, if you've already inflicted judgment on the boss by throwing a holy bolt first, it's going to consume judgment, reducing the Spear of Heaven's active cooldown. Now, personally, I don't feel the need to do that. I don't think that it really is all that beneficial because you're getting resource reductions in other ways, including, by the way, from the circle itself, the consecration circle. It's the modifier that you're getting from the pronouncement that's the most important one. Spear of the Heavens' first spear gains a permanent judgment mark, thereby keeping judgment on the boss, and remains on the battlefield dealing damage per second for 8 seconds. Rather than just one burst at the end, it actually continuously keeps dealing damage. So during that 8 seconds, your next piece of the combination is to go ahead and call down your Arbiter form, Arbiter of Justice. This has a long cooldown, so you're going to want to make sure that you're ready to use it at the time that you call it down. It does a lot of things. First of all, it turns you into an Arbiter. Basically, you have wings. And you will have that for 27 seconds, dealing a certain amount of damage upon landing, because you're going to go up into the sky and then you're going to come back down. Arbiter's form has wings, as I talked about, and has wing strikes, which they recast every certain amount of, I think it's every 2 seconds, I think. The Arbiter form gains the following benefits: 100% movement speed, and boy is that fun. Wing strikes deal 200% increased damage, and then the wing strikes apply vulnerable. So you can apply vulnerable via your Holy Bolt, you can apply vulnerable via Arbiter of Justice, and you're going to get increased damage for your wing strikes. If you'll remember, I also had Tyrael's Jurisdiction as an aspect on one of my rings. That also increased my wing damage. So the minute you come down in Arbiter form, you should just completely melt any boss. If you aren't, start throwing the Holy Bolt, start throwing the Blessed Shield, and then it'll eventually go away, because then you're doing that combined with the wing strikes, combined with the spear damage, combined with the consecration damage. It just melts them right away. Now, one thing I do want to call out here, the only problem that this build seems to have is with barriers on bosses. So if your boss has the blue bar across its health bar, I have not figured out why yet, but they seem to be pretty hard to take down. But when they do, that boss just melts, as I talked about. So sometimes you do have to be a little bit patient, wait for the barrier to get dropped. And the barrier will drop. It just takes a little bit longer for some reason to do enough damage to the barrier to bring it down. Now, the last skill to mention is the Defiance Aura, which I strictly use for its passive abilities, which is an armor increase and increase to resistances. Now, this all helps keep me stay alive and tanky, and more importantly, it keeps my fortification up and full. I have a number of items in our passives as well as the Paragon board that keep me with other offensive and defensive buffs as well as keeping my fortification up. And here's where you can see that my fortification is a duplication, basically, of my life. And the more fortify I have, the more things actually trigger off of that. So if we do a fortify as a filter, here is one of the passives that I'm using that trigger off of fortify. Blocking fortifies you for 1.5% of your maximum life. Okay, cool. That's nice. So every time the blocking occurs. But here are the ones that are the most important. The best offense. You deal 18% increased damage while fortified. You gain 18% crit strike damage while fortified. Now, these two are small. I mean, they're 18% each. They're not worth a whole lot. But early on in the build, when you're still leveling up to level 60, this is huge. These are huge damage increases. So making sure to spec into that, I think, is important for this particular build. It certainly makes me feel better, for example, when I'm in Infernal Hordes. When you get to the end of any wave, which is when they, of course, start throwing everything at you, you can stand in a consecration circle and stand in the middle of all of those enemies and for the most part, feel pretty comfortable that you're not going to take a single chunk of life. You're just going to stand there and tank. And it's a beautiful thing because of the way that this build has been put together. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go through every single one of the passives that I've chosen because you'll be able to find them on the Max Roll build sheet yourself that I provide down in the description. I do want to make sure, though, to call out the key passive, which is Coat of Arms. Your damage is increased by 75% of your armor and 50% of your block chance. So this is all going to be triggered off of two things. There is our armor, 26,254. So I'm getting a 75% damage increase of that. And then of your block chance, which is purely based off of your shield. And then you can also increase block chance via different modifiers as well. You'll also have the ability to do so in your Paragon boards. Okay, last piece of this build to talk about. Before I hand you the URL that you can go and take a look at for yourself, let's take a look at the Paragon boards that I've implemented so far and why I chose them. Okay, here we are with the Paragon board. And let's start right from the very first one because everyone gets the same first Paragon board. In this particular case, I went up the right-hand side, focusing primarily on strength nodes and willpower nodes. I also made sure to get increases to max life as well as increases to damage. And especially this first rare node where it's based off of your strength, you're going to get both the 40% damage as well as any kind of bonus as well. When we get to the socket on the first board, I chose the Undaunted socket. And this is going to be based off of every willpower purchase within range, and this increases your damage based on fortification again. So it ties back, it's continuously tacking on all of the pieces that I've built in order to either increase damage or increase my defenses. So we're going to gain in this case, it's a 3.7 increase per node for a total of 18.3% damage while fortified. And then because I've now got the bonus, I'm also getting a 15% damage reduction the more fortify that you have. So that's also an increase to my damage, or to my armor. And then if I ever get it to legendary status at level 45, it'll increase my damage by another 5%. Now, if we go up to the first Paragon board here, I'll be honest with you, I don't know what their names are. so I can't really tell you what the name of this board is, but I will tell you that it is the board that has the Castle Legendary node. And this Castle Legendary node increases my damage by 1.8% of your armor. This is the big one. When I hit this, my damage went through the roof. And I was just melting everything. Now, at this particular point, I think I was on Torment 1, but I still was just breezing through every piece of content. So the first board that you absolutely should choose with this build is the board that has the Castle Legendary node, and I had to turn this so that it was as close to the entry point as possible. And then for the rares, you've got a rare here for increased damage for crowd-controlled enemies and increased to total resistance. This is the Insulate rare. I also am calling in the Defiance rare, which is an increase to total armor and increase to total resistance. The next board that I chose, was it? Yeah, it was this one. And this one has the Endure Legendary node, which increases my damage while fortified again. So we had the socket that increased damage based off of fortification. Now we've got a legendary node that increases damage based off of fortification. Another reason for you to make sure to spec into keeping your fortification up. By the way, Diablo and Blizzard do not do a very good job of describing what Fortify is or how to get it. So make sure to look it up. That was what I did. In my case, I then found things that would provide Fortify based on specific actions. So if you'll remember, there was a particular aspect of one of my gear pieces, I think it was Hale's Have for my chest piece, that as long as I was healing while at full, meaning I had passive healing going, whether that was via consecration or whether that was just via passive healing, then Fortify would build because I was trying to heal over my health limit. So it would actually put it into Fortify. So you keep making that possible. Now all of a sudden you're able to trigger off of having that Fortify and using it for positive things. And then the rare that we went in for here is Restorative, which is increased to max life and healing received. I need to increase my willpower some more in order to get the bonus for that one. We then come over to the last board that I have socketed in, and this one is the board that has the Sentencing Legendary node. Now, this one isn't quite as powerful as the other two for me, but the rares and the socket that I put in here really balance this board out for me. But this is the board that has Sentencing. Judging an enemy causes them to take 90% more damage from you until they die. Now, this isn't very important with mobbing, but when it comes to rares and bosses, this absolutely is key, because the more that you inflict judgment on any particular enemy, any other damage that you do on them, such as turning into the Arbiter of Justice, throwing down spears, whatever throwing your Blessed Shield, as well as even Consecration for that matter, they're going to take more damage while they are being judged. And remember, the Spear of Heavens, when it throws down, it maintains judgment on the enemy for 8 seconds as long as it's within range of that spear. So that's additional damage that can be done during that entire 8-second span. Then when it came to rare nodes, we're looking at Restorative for increased health and healing. So again, healing received. Then we get Benediction for judgment damage and healing received. We get Grace, which is lucky hit chance. That's not important. Strength, not important. Judgment damage, that's important. That's the one that's key. The lucky hit chance, there is one particular aspect that is lucky hit oriented that is in that list of aspects that I gave you. So this does help with that. There's a specific aspect also that I want to make you all aware of. I don't think I have it equipped right now, but there's an aspect for Paladins that will, based on lucky hit chance, rain down Blessed Spears. Now, it's not the full-on Blessed Spear as if you had called it based on the particular version of Blessed Spears. It's the basic Blessed Spears. But still, that's 4 Blessed Spears doing damage according to your skill base and your attribute base based on a lucky hit chance. So, and then of course there's a cooldown on it as well. So sometimes the lucky hit chance can be valuable. Then the socket that we have in here is the Law glyph socket, and this one increases judgment damage based on strength purchased within range. And then of course there is a strength bonus that increases judging an enemy causes them to take 15% damage for 5 seconds. So now you've got damage over time. And then there's also an increase by 5% if you ever hit legendary. So these are just some of the things that I've implemented for this particular build. This particular character is not necessarily done. I could continue to build it out and build it even stronger, adding in more Paragon boards and things, but it's just going to keep adding on to what it already is. There's really nothing new at this point, which is why I wanted to go ahead and put this guide video together for you. Now, the last thing I want to show you is I'll wrap this video up by actually letting you see pieces of a dungeon run that I did on Torment 2 with this particular build so that you can get an idea of what it looks like against both mobs as well as dungeon bosses. Now, again, as I said, dungeon bosses are going to look different and feel different than a world boss is going to, but I'm sure you already know that. So hopefully you've been enjoying this particular build guide. And if you have, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me. If you haven't subscribed, please do that as well. And then please enjoy the dungeon run for my hammer and shield throwing Arbiter Paladin build. Rolls right off the tongue. Talk to you soon. Explore Vile Hive and slay Agony. Okay. Know what that was. I assume I have to do those for a reason. Don't really know. Except for it wasn't to actually kill the boss I'm supposed to be killing. missed this asshole. I just remembered as soon as I get that legendary node, I'm going to be getting all kinds of huge amounts of damage increase. Holy crap. Okay. 3 points. There it is, baby. 375.7% increased damage. $378.2% increased damage. And I'm going to increase it even more. Oh, this is going to be awesome. How freaking long is this damn dungeon? I thought that these were new enemies that I hadn't seen before.